Cuba will continue to act as a guarantor of the implementation of the peace agreement between the government of Colombia and the FARC-EP, despite attacks on its role. New York City is painting a Black Lives Matter mural on the street directly outside of Trump Tower in Midtown Manhattan. Sudan began loosening lockdown measures in and around the capital Khartoum on Wednesday after 3 months of strict restrictions. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Cuba, where Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Rogelio Sierra, confirmed this Thursday that the island will continue to act as a guarantor of the implementation of the peace agreement between the government of Colombia and the FARC-EP. Sierra expressed that Cuba expects the Republic of Colombia to recognize the validity of the agreements signed with other states and to comply with these commitments, in particular with the protocol for the breakdown of talks with the National Liberation Army. The Cuban Minister of Foreign Affairs issued a statement on June 4th denouncing the acts of political manipulation regarding Cuba's role in the Colombian peace process, which served as a pretext for the United States to include Cuba on its unilateral list of states that allegedly do not cooperate fully with the US in its efforts against terrorism.
Cuba has been receiving requests from the international community, also from prominent personalities of Colombian society, asking Cuba to maintain its condition of guarantor in Colombia's peace process. Taking these requests into account, Cuba, and that is the reason why I invited you this morning, Cuba has decided to maintain for the time being the condition of guarantor in the peace process, in the implementation of the peace process between the FARC and the Colombian government. At the same time, we want to say that Cuba expects the Colombian government to fulfill the agreements it has signed with other nations, with other states, including Cuba in its condition of guarantor, and particularly the implementation of the protocols of rupture of the peace talks between the Colombian government and the ELN.
In Colombia, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace demanded information from the mayor's office in Medellin regarding 108 missing persons in Commune 13. The International Center for Transitional Justice noted the existence in this commune of some 435 possible victims of forced disappearance between 1978 and 2016. The ICTJ has information on 327 cases, but none on the remaining 108. The organization called on the Medellin Mayor's Office, the Public Prosecutor's Office and the National Administrative Department of Statistics to publish the information they have on these cases within 10 days. Commune 13 is a popular neighborhood in Medellin that has been severely impacted by the armed conflict in Colombia. And responding to the call of international organizations, Colombia's National Liberation Army proposed a bilateral ceasefire to the government, which was rejected by President Ivan Duque. Our correspondent in Bogotá, Hernán Tobar, brings us the details.
This proposal, made known by the ELN guerrilla, responds to the call of the United Nations and Pope Francis to put a ceasefire during the COVID-19 health emergency in all countries where there are armed conflicts. However, the Colombian president rejected the proposal.
There is no room for anything other than the fulfillment of the conditions established by the President in front of the ELN to hand over all the hostages, to leave the kidnapping forever and to cease immediately the criminal actions.
Analysts say the government's response is unfortunate, as options for resuming peace talks with this guerrilla group, which have been broken off since mid-January 2019, are lost.
There is no message from the government of interest in agreeing to a bilateral ceasefire. This is bad news. The 140 municipalities where the ELN remains and the communities suffer because there is an ongoing conflict and there is no atmosphere of distension on either side.
The previous ceasefire proposed by this insurgent group was held from April 1st to 31 of the same month, which scenario had as beginning the arrival of COVID-19 in the country. Days before, the UN representative in Colombia urged the armed group to make a ceasefire. On that occasion, it was the ELN who ceased hostilities unilaterally and brought some tranquility to the most vulnerable populations.
Today, in these territories abandoned by the Colombian government, hit by the conflict, the war, and the social abandonment due to the lack of social investment, we have to submit to the chaotic situation of this region. I think that the initiative taken by the ELN's insurgency is very important. For example, in April, an unilateral cessation, that it could be seen how the violent situation ends, the situations of war.
From various political sectors, a call is made to the government not to block the options for complete peace and not to underestimate the importance of these actions for the country.
We want to call on Iván Duque's government to understand that he does not govern for the Democratic Center Party. He does not govern for the interests of the sector that accompany this increasingly discredited political force. He governs for all Colombians, and therefore his agenda must be the agenda of the nation. And if there is something that Colombians desire, it is peace, with social justice and an integral and complete peace.
While this possibility is moving away in the midst of the pandemic, farmers, indigenous people, and Afros are the most vulnerable actors in the armed conflict, who condemn the government's closing of the roads to peace.
Mexican health authorities reported a record daily rise in coronavirus cases this Thursday at almost 7,000. Despite this figure, during its regular press conference, the health secretary reported that the epidemic curve is flattening in the capital, which was the hardest hit territory until June. Mexico accumulates over 275,000 cases, while the death toll stands at over 32,000, with almost 800 new fatalities reported in the past 24 hours. Despite these numbers, Mexico's hospital capacity has not been exceeded and stands at 45% occupancy of general beds and 39% of intensive care beds. And our correspondent in Havana, Laura Palmero, brings us a roundup of news from the Caribbean region.
Thanks for the contact. These are the most recent stories and news from Caribbean countries. Charlene Cabral-Robinson, the premier of Turks and Caicos Island, visited the Cuban Medical Brigade Henry Reef that stays in her country in order to fight COVID-19 pandemics. At InterHealth Canada Hospital, the Premier of Turks and Caicos Island, Cabral-Robinson, along with the Education Minister, thanked the Cuban health professionals for their help in times of pandemic to fulfill the duty to save lives voluntarily. According to Dr. Alfredo Moran, head of the Henry Reef Internationalist Contingent, the island head of state highlighted the courage by the Cuban doctors who separated from their families to contribute the local response to fight the pathogen. The Henry Reef contingent arrived in the Turks and Caicos Island on June 16 to reinforce the fight against the pandemic and minimize contagions. The Turks and Caicos Island and Cuba signed a 3-month agreement to provide additional medical support to intensive care units, with the possibility of extending it to a longer period if necessary. And in Guyana, the caretaker president David Granger informed there was a widespread fraud in March 2nd general elections.
As of today, 3 o'clock, the Caribbean Court of Justice has made a ruling, and we cannot do anything but the ruling, but they have made no coercive orders. That means they have not given any instructions to what GCOM is empowered under the laws of Guyana to do. So we will have to assess the situation that we're in now. The matter will go back to the Election Commission. But as far as we are concerned, we have evidence that there has been massive fraud and irregularities, and we will continue to fight to make sure that your votes are counted.
Guyana's caretaker president David Granger affirmed that the matter will now have to be finally decided by GECOM. Granger's stance puts the pressure on GECOM chair Claudette Sainz, who has already said that the recount results is what shall be declared. In Haiti, social organizations criticized the police brutality that frustrated for the second time a mobilization against insecurity in Haiti. The platform Now Cancian, We Are Aware, denounced the deployment of law enforcement agents and the use of tear gas against young demonstrators. In particular, they pointed to the action of specialized units, such as Intervention Corps, for the maintenance of order. The protesters carry signs with messages such as "We want to live," "We have the right to live," "Down with insecurity," and others, while asking the population to stand up against the authoritarian movement. And these are the most recent stories and news from Caribbean countries. Thanks for the contact, and let's go back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Laura, and we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. New York City is painting a Black Lives Matter mural on the street directly outside of Trump Tower in Midtown Manhattan. Members of the community, joined by New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, gathered this Thursday to paint a mural across the street from Trump Tower, similar to the one painted outside the White House. President Trump mocked the mural plan last week, saying it would denigrate the luxury avenue and antagonize the city's police as a symbol of hate. Meanwhile, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio has stressed it is his administration's way of honoring the black men and women who helped build New York. According to local media, Fifth Avenue will be closed between 56th and 57th Streets until Sunday morning to finish the work. This Thursday, top leaders of the Pentagon are offering testimony to Congress. The House Armed Services Committee is hearing testimony by Defense Secretary Mark Esper and General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, for the first time since March 4th. The top Pentagon leaders will face a long list of questions, including regarding Trump's push for an aggressive response to the civil unrest over police brutality and systemic racism, which led to a clash between Esper and Milley. Esper has defended the use of National Guard soldiers to support law enforcement agencies. On June 1st, a National Guard helicopter was flown at extremely low altitude to help disperse protesters from the Capitol's streets, allowing Trump to walk from the White House to St. John's Church, prompting a Pentagon investigation into whether that was a proper use of military resources.
Let the record show the witnesses answered in the affirmative.
Greenpeace deployed a large banner from a crane overlooking Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris this Thursday, demanding the French government take action on climate change. Greenpeace activists accuse France and President Emmanuel Macron of not doing enough to fight climate change. The group wants tougher laws on emissions and accuses Macron of making empty promises. Macron announced 15 billion euros in new climate measures last week after Green Party candidates did well in municipal elections across the country. The Director General of the World Health Organization reiterated on Thursday his calls for global unity in the fight against the novel coronavirus and stressed the general lack of leadership in the midst of the pandemic.
My friends, make no mistake. The greatest threat we face now is not the virus itself. Rather, it's the lack of leadership and solidarity at the global and national levels. That's why I said earlier, each and every individual should reflect. This is a tragedy that actually is forcing us to miss many of our friends, losing many lives. And we cannot defeat this pandemic as a divided world. The COVID-19 pandemic is a test of global solidarity and global leadership. The virus thrives on division, but is thwarted when we unite.
According to the International Labour Organization, the coronavirus pandemic has plunged the world of work into an unprecedented crisis. With the soaring number of new infections daily, global leaders participating in the ILO summit on COVID-19 called for a comprehensive approach to counter the economic and social impact of the deadly pandemic. According to the UN agency, there was a 14% drop in global working hours during the second quarter of 2020, equivalent to the loss of 400 million full-time jobs. This is a sharp increase on the previous estimate issued on May 27th of a 10.7% drop, representing 305 million jobs. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Xiao Lishan has announced that China will hold a new round of military talks with India over the border tensions.
China and India will continue to maintain dialogue and communication through military and diplomatic channels, including by holding a new round of commander-level talks and meeting of the working mechanism for consultation and coordination of China-India border affairs. We hope India can work together with China, implement each consensus reached by both sides through concrete actions, work together to advance further de-escalation and easing of the situation in the border region.
In Japan, the governor of Tokyo said on Thursday that the spike in new cases of the novel coronavirus is a wake-up call for the city and urged younger people to act responsibly so as not to infect the elderly and other vulnerable people.
There were 224 cases. This is the largest number of cases so far. Those under age 30, including teenagers, these make up 82% of the cases. So there is no change in that it is younger people who are getting infected.
We have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić called for peace on Thursday as protests continue following the announcement of the reimposition of the lockdown due to rising coronavirus cases.
Dear citizens, I promise you that we will be able to protect peace and stability despite the criminal, hooligan, violent attacks we are all shocked by. Shocked because in Novi Sad, in 1941, the year when fascist units invaded, they did not damage the facade of the city hall building. Some people did last night. I'm urging all people in Belgrade and Novi Sad and all other cities not to confront the hooligans themselves. We will do that as a state. We will work and we will win. We will preserve peace for our country. Surrender was never an option, and now I'm flying to Paris to fight for Serbia. I will see you soon. Serbia wins.
Kenyan authorities have announced the beginning of talks on a free trade agreement with the United States, while stressing that regional integration commitments will be maintained.
The United States of America have today formally entered into negotiations that will culminate in a historic free trade agreement, which will allow duty-free access for Kenya into the U.S. market.
I know there are some who are concerned that this agreement will weaken our regional agreements such as we have with the East African Community or the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Let me assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that you should have no cause to worry. As His Excellency the President has said many times before, our commitment to regional integration runs deep. After all, he said and done, charity begins at home. We recognize that only by partnering and trading closely with our neighbors can we become stronger partners abroad. We are therefore entering into these negotiations with a full understanding and expectation that the agreement will strengthen, not weaken, our regional commitments.
Sudan began loosening lockdown measures in and around the capital Khartoum on Wednesday after 3 months of strict restrictions due to the coronavirus pandemic. The usual bustle of pedestrians and car traffic has returned to Khartoum streets as shops and restaurants reopened. In April, authorities halted government services and closed local markets and restaurants in Khartoum province, severely restricting daily life in the capital and its twin city Omdurman in order to contain the spread of COVID-19. Sudan's health ministry has reported over 10,000 coronavirus cases, including more than 600 fatalities. The World Health Organization Regional Director for Africa has stressed that COVID-19 vaccines must be available to everyone, not only those with the financial resources to access them.
We know that vaccines are very important for public health, including for the COVID-19. When we have an effective COVID-19 vaccine, it will make sure that it takes into account, if countries have participated, the immune response of populations in Africa. We know also that when we have a vaccine, it'll need to be rolled out at an unprecedented speed and scale. Equity must be a central focus of our efforts. And too often, African countries have ended up at the back of the queue for new technologies, including vaccines. These life-saving products must be made available to everyone, not only those who can afford to pay.
And the World Health Organization has noted that in less than 5 months, COVID-19 has claimed over 12,000 lives across Africa, thus surpassing the death toll of 11,000 in the world's worst Ebola outbreak in West Africa between 2014 and 2016. According to the WHO data, the number of confirmed coronavirus cases in Africa has now surpassed 500,000. WHO Regional Director Dr. Matshidiso Moeti has warned that health systems face an increasing threat of being overwhelmed by the pandemic. The number of cases has more than doubled in 22 countries in the region during the last month. Almost 2/3 of African countries are experiencing community-based transmission. Meanwhile, Algeria, Egypt, Ghana, Nigeria and South Africa account for about 71% of cases in the continent.
In August, and we are indeed feeling that.
Nigeria has resumed domestic flights between Lagos and the capital Abuja following changes to the country's coronavirus restrictions.
I've been waiting to go back home for a while. I couldn't go by road because of different other challenges, but I felt relieved that the airport will be open at last. So it was a good one. I am a frequent traveler. I don't know when it will get back to normal, but I see this as a good change. We've learned something from the COVID-19. It's something that is negative, but we have got a lot of positives from it.
Some of us, those of us who've come out early are the guinea pigs. So when people see, oh, you went, you came, you've been around a while, nothing is wrong with you, a lot more people get enough confidence to start flying again.
Palestinian activists held a demonstration on Thursday against Israel's plans to annex occupied West Bank territories. Activists called on Palestinian residents to join the ongoing mobilizations to denounce the expansionist plan of the Israeli regime supported by the United States. Meanwhile, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas stated on Wednesday his readiness to resume talks under the auspices of the UN and other countries, and as long as Israel rules out the annexation of occupied Palestinian land. Hamas and Fatah announced a united front early this month aimed at resisting any annexation moves. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature has warned that almost all species of lemur, the small primates native to Madagascar, face extinction. Of the 107 surviving lemur species on the island, some 103 are threatened, including 33 that are critically endangered, the last step before being declared extinct in the wild. The organisation called for a fundamental reimagining of the way humanity interacts with the natural world in an update to its red list of threatened species. More than 40% of Madagascar's original forest cover was lost between the 1950s and the year 2000. Last year, the United Nations Biodiversity Panel warned that up to 1 million species face the risk of extinction. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesoenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Teleso English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.